Then the notion that the public has to pay for the counsel is obviously not correct.
We're going to react to something Ben Shapiro recently said about criminal procedure and civil liberties when the question came up about the right to counsel. Because right now you have a right to a lawyer if you're being prosecuted for a crime. And if you can't afford one, the government, aka taxpayers, will pay for you to have one. Shapiro on his show recently questioned whether there should really be a right to that. Take a listen to what he had to say.
As far as Gideon versus Wainwright, the idea that if you're an indigent criminal defendant, that you have to provide a counsel at trial, no, there's nothing in the Constitution that says specifically that you have a federal right to counsel. You have a right to defend yourself. Then the notion that the public has to pay for the counsel is obviously not correct. I mean, I don't know. If that had been true, then it wouldn't have taken until Gideon versus Wainwright to say so. Gideon versus Wainwright was like 1963 case. So for 200 years, that wasn't the case.
So what he's saying is that you have a right to defend yourself, but you don't have a right to a taxpayer-funded defense attorney. What do you make of that, Hannah?
I think it's amazing that this guy is considered a good debater because that is one of the most asinine things I've ever heard. The Sixth Amendment literally says you have a right to an attorney. And when we say you have a right in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution, that means that you have a right no matter what. Not if you can afford it, not if you can raise the money to get it, you have a right to an attorney. And that's exactly as it should be, because if you are an individual who is having to go up against the government and all of its power and all of its money, you have virtually no ability to defend yourself unless you have money to hire an attorney or unless one is provided for you. And so if we are ever going to have any kind of system of justice where we can actually ensure that it's being allocated in a way where people are not wrongfully convicted, which we still miss the mark on drastically, we have to ensure that people at the very least have representation and have the ability to try to defend themselves against the government, and that the government has to make its case against an attorney, proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that somebody did something. Now, he's right that the federal courts did not uphold that right until Gideon Wainwright. That's an atrocity, but to say that the courts didn't do it for 200 years so it's not in the Constitution is bogus. We had tons of bad law.
Because on that point, Hannah, that's like the Second Amendment has always said there's an individual right to bear arms. And of course, Ben Shapiro would agree with us on this, but that wasn't recognized until the 2000s in DC versus Heller. So would he say, therefore, that it wasn't a right before? Well, no, it was. It just wasn't being fully respected by our legal system. I just want to read you guys the Sixth Amendment, which says, it's pretty short. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law. All of that's kind of confusing, but ... The accused shall enjoy the right to ... have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So it says you have a right to counsel, which in this case I think has to mean a right to taxpayers funding it because they're funding the lawyers prosecuting you, and you're entitled to due process of law. So how could anyone have their right to a fair trial met if they don't have a lawyer because they're indigent, they're broke? I mean, of all the things I'm willing to pay tax dollars for, or of all the things I'm unwilling to, but am forced to, that shouldn't be funded, the idea that criminal defense attorneys, which are public defenders, which are in many cases extremely underfunded and overworked, and they aren't able to provide adequate representation, that is not the part that bothers me. I'm okay with my money being used to ensure that the rights of the accused are upheld. And I think that conservatives support due process and all these kinds of things when it comes to Me Too, and they should see the value in having a process that respects everyone's rights and funds adequate defense for them. I was surprised by this take. I guess it probably is the old school kind of conservative legal philosophy take on the matter, but it seems to me to be very out of step with what the Constitution actually says and the principles of due process that we would want to uphold.
Well, you'd be a fool to not hold that stance, Brad. And I think at the end of the day, if you haven't, you have to be so unaware of how the criminal justice system operates, and you basically have to be a simp for big government, because you're saying that you think the government's always going to get it right and act ethically, and that people should basically be able to defend themselves if they're innocent. But we wrongfully convict people who are innocent all the time. We spend a vast amount of money in prosecutors' offices. We give the state tons of resources. They have all kinds of power. The police work for them. The labs work for them. An individual is supposed to be able to go up against all of that and not even have an attorney when they can't afford it, which, by the way, hardly anybody can afford it because the government can take their sweet time. Their lawyers are on salary. They have no rush. If you're hiring an attorney, you have to pay by the hour. So to be able to even afford to have an offense to go up against these people is insane. And we have wrongfully sentenced people for decades in this country. Something like 73% of North Carolina's death row was sentenced before they had an indigent defense fund. We kill people who are innocent because they can't afford good attorneys. In fact, one of the top reasons people get the death penalty is not because they are necessarily even guilty. It's because they can't afford an attorney. That's one of the top determinants. So even though we do now provide indigent defense funds, they're still very underfunded. I think criminal defense attorneys are some of the most important roles in our entire political sector. They don't get the respect they deserve. They certainly
get vilified sometimes, which I think is really unfortunate. They get tarred with the crimes of their clients.
They don't get the same resources. I mean, I have studies showing some defense attorneys holding thousands of cases at one time. They are overworked, they are underpaid, and they're up against Goliath in the system. And I just think as a whole, Ben's being very disingenuous here. I agree with you. He would never hold that stance on the Second Amendment. And I think if you really want to see people have due process and make sure that we get it right, you have to make sure people have an attorney. And again, it is in very plain language in the Sixth Amendment. So I encourage him to pick up the Bill of Rights and read it again and recognize that just because the Supreme Court does not always uphold all of our rights, just like they've been destroying the Fourth Amendment for decades now, does not mean that the right's not there or should not be upheld.